We are here just buttons away from getting started. Cool. And we are up on YouTube and up on Facebook and everywhere. Okay, great. We may begin. Rachel Ricketts. Welcome so much to Body Kindness. I am holding in my hands a beautiful gift you have given me and the world with this piece of work.
Thank you.
You know, as a mom of two young girls and as a white woman who is self-proclaimed woke, there's a lot that we could do better. And the first thing I loved about your book was the simplicity of the title and, the simplicity of the title for something that is clearly very difficult for white women to do. And so I'm bringing to this conversation all of my vulnerabilities of where I am right now and open heart with a desire. When I was 9 years old, I wanted to help people. And so I'm really working on ways to just bust out of the mold of what does it even mean to help people. And especially, as a helping professional, we have far too long followed in this mold of, well, we do self-help and self-care as if, right? Like there's nothing else to see and nothing else matters. And we know that that is not true. And we've known that it's not true for a long time. And for far too long, we've just chosen not to listen. And what you've gifted, anyone in here who is willing to do better is inspiration, tools, resources, history, all the reasons why when we keep saying, why not? That was the feeling I got from the book. And it's very powerful because when we're in fear, we go to avoid versus approach. And the testimony that I want to open up the conversation with is we do know how to read books as white people. We're very good at it. So we are going to buy the book and read the book. But you beautifully lay out that, cultural activism and systemic change starts from within. And it's great that we're using words like systemic oppression and systemic racism, but that doesn't take an individual off the hook. And so, so I was so grateful when you agreed to talk to me. And I was grateful for the guidance of particular chapters that you wanted me to focus on. And I just want to encourage anyone listening who wants to do better. It starts with participating in the conversation today. It starts with getting the book and having the courage to take meaningful action. Thank you so much for being in conversation with me and for writing this book.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I wanted to dive in because I have prepared a lot of questions.
Okay.
And I have to say I haven't read the full title. So Do Better: Spiritual Activism for Fighting and Healing from White Supremacy. So I wanted to start with the bold letters up top, spiritual activism. Can you tell us what is spiritual activism and why is it the missing but vital piece of dismantling white supremacy and really all forms of oppression?
Yeah. So my answer for what spiritual activism is really like changes given the day because it's so many things. It's sort of like for me, spirituality is so ethereal, right? It's like ethereal. It's intangible. You can't really touch it. It's something just so much bigger than ourselves. But when I started doing spiritual activism work and workshops, it was really about the work I was doing, that I felt that I was called to do, that I feel I am called to do, which is to dismantle white supremacy and all systems of oppression in an intersectional way, as led by connection to something bigger than myself, which also requires me to be deeply connected to myself, um, to connect to all beings, to connect to source, spirit, universe, higher power, whatever it is you want to call it. And for me, I do that in a secular way, and doing so in an informed way that is rooted in and by culturally appreciative, culturally honoring spiritual practices like pranayama, the 8 limbs of yoga, meditation, energy work, which are the practices that really support me in better withstanding the full spectrum of human emotions, moving through the grief, the trauma that inherently is part of racial justice, of dismantling systems of oppression. But in the book, I do describe spiritual activism as the daily, active, ongoing word, thought, speech, action, sometimes inaction that we undertake in an anti-oppressive way that is connected to a secular or non-secular spiritual power and informed by culturally appreciative, culturally honoring spiritual practices.
And I love that it's the daily, right? Because if you can
Mm-hmm.
do something daily, right? And we know we can, right? If you're a coffee drinker, you never miss your coffee. It is you. It's a part of you and it is you. And that there is something meaningful that you can do each day. And it's in the not doing that is, and the opting out, right? And even if in the doing, it's like naming what's happening and what you're seeing. Naming white supremacy when you see it, that is an action because it will help keep you from not acknowledging what is real and what is true. And we've all seen a big change in what the media is acknowledging and naming now, and
Mm-hmm.
definitely since
Yeah,
George
absolutely.
Floyd's death. I
Absolutely.
mean, you cannot, ignore how long it has been ignored and unspoken. And if it's not talked about, yeah, then you can make up your own stories in mind and just not do anything about it. And it is at a tipping point where, we're now more than ever able to take on a daily type of a practice.
Well, the truth is everyone's taking on a
Mm-hmm.
daily practice. Like if you are choosing not to see, if you're choosing not to
Mm-hmm.
to bear witness, if you are not naming white supremacy, that's a
Right.
daily practice too. So there's no way outside. There's no way to be outside of these systems of harm or oppression. Everyone is involved in them. Everyone is perpetuating them in some way, shape, or form, especially those who have the most power and privilege. So racially,
Mm-hmm.
that's white people. And the lie that folks have been sold, especially cis white women, is that you're not engaging in
Mm.
it, that you can be on the sidelines of it, that you're innocent in some way, that you're not implicated in it, and that's absolute BS. That's just
Mm-hmm.
not true. So what my hope is with this book is to support all beings in doing the inner work so that we can acknowledge the systems of harm, the ways in which they have harmed us, and specifically the ways in which they have harmed those made most marginalized. So for me, that's especially queer and trans, Black and Indigenous women and femmes, and have a deep understanding of the ways in which we are all involved in these systems, and that these systems will never end until we acknowledge them, address them, and mitigate the harm we cause every
Yeah.
single day.
Yeah, I do get the feeling that it, for for white women who are in the approach mode, that it's too much like, okay, there's going to be a check off or an ending, this,
Mm-hmm.
like, I
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say, oh, ever we think it's just a homework assignment, but do you know what I mean, is that I think that we're wanting to get
Yeah.
back to our
Well, some of you
comfort.
do.
Okay, so maybe some do, right? But it's
Yes.
like we're
Yes.
wanting to get back to
Yeah.
our comfort, and in wanting to get back to the comfort,
Yes.
we could say, oh, well, we're not choosing to ignore
Yes.
it, we're naming it. But if the expectation is you in your lifetime will be like you were before and comfortable, that is,
Mm-hmm.
you're not in the right
Mm-hmm.
direction. Like in your lifetime,
Correct.
expect
Correct.
this is the never ending, um, decision, that daily choice, that never ending
Yeah.
action or inaction. And I think that
Yeah.
radically accepting that moves you forward. Um,
Absolutely, and it's very liberating. It sounds
mhm,
very terrifying, but it's actually an incredibly liberating experience, and I talk about this a
mhm,
lot in the book, but this is healing work and trauma work and shadow work for everyone. And that means that this isn't just about race or racial justice. And for me, when we're talking about racial justice or white supremacy, we're talking about ending all forms of oppression intersectionally, because we can't end one
right.
without ending all of them. So we're ending transphobia and homophobia and fat phobia and patriarchy and classism and capitalism and all of these systems of oppression that cause everyone harm. But the expectation of comfort is part of
Yeah.
systems of oppression. And those who have the most power and privilege really are deeply conditioned and ingrained to believe that comfort is their right. To get very angry and defensive when they're in situations that make them uncomfortable. And so that's why this work for me is really necessary to do from the inside out, because you have to be able to
Mhm,
work through having the capacity to be
mhm,
uncomfortable, to face your discomfort, and get really clear about, like, why do I have this expectation that comfort is
yeah.
my birthright? And what is prohibiting me from being able to move through and expand my tolerance for discomfort? Because when you cut yourself off from your capacity to withstand discomfort, it means you're also cutting yourself off from your capacity to feel
Mhm,
pain and grief and anger, which I get
mhm,
into in the book. And when you do that, you also cut yourself off from fully expanding into and feeling joy, hope, resilience. You can't cut one part off without cutting off
mhm,
the other end. You stay in the middle, and nothing changes when we stay in the middle. And you're not only robbing, the world of an opportunity for collective healing and equity and true liberation. You also rob yourself of
mhm,
those things, and rob yourself of inner peace. So this is healing work on all levels
mhm.
from the inside
Yeah,
out.
that's great. I There might be a story about me and the girls that come up soon, but I wanna keep going with my questions, and we'll see if it fits in. If not, it's no big deal, but it's brewing. Um, so can you tell me a little bit more about what brought you to the spiritual activism work?
Sure, I mean, I say it started
Mhm,
from before I was born, started in my mom's womb. Navigating the world as a queer, Black, multiracial woman, daughter of an only child of a single parent, who was chronically ill and disabled, and all the really heinous experiences we endured individually and together navigating
mhm,
systems of oppression, anti-Blackness, misogyny, heteropatriarchy, medical
mhm,
racism, etc. So it's a culmination of my own personal experiences navigating all of those things and my professional experiences as a trained anti-racism educator, attorney, and someone who's always deeply spiritual and raised by spiritual people. Really have always felt a deep connection to something bigger than myself, something higher than myself, that really allowed me to move through my own discomfort and allowed me to maintain resilience, allowed me um, to do hard
mhm.
things, and move through hard things. So when I started coming back to this work, because I left it for a while, to become a corporate attorney. But when I
Minor
came
detour.
when I came back to this work, minor detour. It was a dark time. It was a dark time. When I came back to this work, it was just sort of organically from this space, because it was the only way I knew how to move through it. And really, for me, it was like I couldn't stay silent anymore. It was that was causing me so much harm, and people kept asking me to speak
Mhm,
on this stuff, and so it just felt like it was coming out of me even before I necessarily
mhm,
recognized it. And I was doing grief
mm,
coaching for a while after my mother
mhm.
died,
Yep.
which I talk about in the book, and then I promptly realized the most grief I've ever experienced in my life is a result of being um, a queer Black woman. And I was, in so much grief and so oppressed, I didn't even know I was queer until
Mhm,
a few years ago. So um, that grief work very promptly led me to this work. And this work is grief work.
mhm,
Dismantling systems of oppression, addressing white supremacy, and committing to racial justice is all grief
mhm.
work.
Yeah. This is making me think of this short little story about with me and my daughters. So they're 6 and 8, and it's Black History Month, right? The one month where you get the school assignment, something's going to happen. I'm in DCPS, right? Um, and there's this, there's a DC public school suggested do a video about someone in Black history who you admire, who has changed your life, and talk about it. And so we're doing it. We did our research. They each picked their own person, and we were getting further along in the project. So they were writing out, doing research, writing out sentences, getting ready to practice to shoot video. And I found myself kind of coming in, and just I could see, like, I don't know, I guess for them in their minds, it did seem like this school homework assignment. And so I ended up saying, hey, I want to talk to you about the importance of continuing on this project and finishing our work today. And I said, this is not just a school project. I said, this is about respect and history. And this is about making sure we learn about history, and we respect people from our history whose stories are not usually told 12 months out of the year. And I said, when I was your age, mommy didn't have an assignment like this, or I don't remember. And I said, and I know why. And that was because her school didn't take care, or, like, and so I was trying to find a reason, help them understand. And I'm saying this all out loud. And I did feel a lot of grief personally, or, like, not any sense of pride, but just anger and frustration. Like, first of all, the fact that I even have to, like, encourage my kids to keep their energy up, and this is not a homework assignment. I'm like, that's white supremacy right there. And
Hmm.
and yeah, and just the anger comes in flares, but it's like looking at the
Hmm.
past mistakes. Shoot, why didn't the world do better for me? I feel, and back to, we already said this earlier, but I feel like I'm cleaning up this mess that I'm never going to clean up. And so it gets, so on the one time I'm seeing the privilege, and the other time it's like, gosh, I wish my girls were in a better place than where I wouldn't even have to say those words. And yeah, so it's just a bunch of mixed emotions around it. But I can feel good, right? That I'm helping to make the connection, that I'm trying to break a chain. I'm trying to do something different. But at the same time, frustrated with a lack of progress that I'm able to make. So I don't know if I'm looking for an answer or potential response there, but I do feel grief often whenever I notice that I'm engaging in the daily work. So I just want to acknowledge that, at least.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of understanding how um, this work works, is being able to engage in all of those feelings, in the grief, in the anger, in the shame, in the, why isn't this different? And I would also say, in terms of the journey with your kids, like, that's also really work for you to take on, right? Like, that's part of the public school system for sure, needs to ramp up, and you as a
Mm-hmm.
parent need to ramp up, to make sure that that's not an assignment that they think is just something that they can tick off
Mm-hmm.
and move on. Like, um, and when we start doing that work for our children young, when we start doing, which requires us to do our work, we can't relay that to our children
Mm-hmm.
unless we have done our work to be able to do that. But they absorb us, they absorb our culture, they absorb what's going on in our homes and our spaces. So that's why it's really vital that we are doing this work, so that when we are raising our children, they get that head
Mm-hmm.
start. And I wrote this book specifically so that, I mean, for many reasons, but most importantly, I wrote this so that, little Black, Indigenous, and women, girls of color, especially little
Mm-hmm.
Black girls of color, like me, don't have to endure all of the oppression and othering and ostracizing that I went through from young. I remember very explicit acts of racism and anti-Blackness from 4 years old. So
Mm-hmm.
kids know it well, and
Right.
they absorb it from us. It's not
Mm-hmm.
natural, but it's our work to unlearn, so that we can help them maintain that oneness that they are born
Mm-hmm.
with, knowing and
Yeah.
understanding.
Yeah. And believe it or not, there are parts of the book that I have read to my girls, is that I always try to show them what mommy's doing too. And is on page 43, which I happen to really love in particular, with work I do around inner child work. So where you talk about investigating our inner child.
Mm,
And it's very beautiful and powerful how you talk about healing happens, and how it involves caring for and liberating your inner child. And so it's definitely it was it was my kids at 6 and 8 were able to pick it up, and it was really
Mm,
meaningful to me too to read about that and to sort of, I don't know, to connect to that as part of the foundation of like, yes, that is the ways in which my needs weren't met when I was younger matter. And the work
mhm,
I'm doing
mhm,
today
mhm.
is helping me, love, connect, and care with that inner child and bring that inner child back in. And yeah, and then quite literally, doing whatever it is I can to break the chain to try to help my girls be part of the next generation of doing better. And so that they are, whatever they decide will engage in their level of the work, because it will need to continue on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, so
Mhm.
you had mentioned your mother in the book, and I read your beautiful stories about your mother in the book. And so when readers buy that, they'll get the full picture. But her death impacted your work. Did you want to share a little bit more with listeners about that journey?
Sure. My mother was diagnosed with primary progressive multiple sclerosis quite late because it
Mm,
took her about 10 years to be properly diagnosed because of medical racism and white supremacy systems of harm. And so I was 13 years old when she told me she was actually misdiagnosed. She was diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's
mm,
disease first, and I was told she had a year or two to live. Um, and they were wrong about that, but in a positive way. So she had MS, and then increasingly dealt with um, a physical degradation over
mhm,
decades. That was, also further instigated by trauma and stress and harm and not being adequately cared for, not being believed, um, um, just additional forms of oppression for someone who was already in a stressed and vulnerable state. Um, and part of my becoming an attorney was to be able to support her and I, because I
mm,
saw the impact of being powerless, and what that does. I mean, I knew it well already just growing up in a Black female body, but knowing it was just her and and that like I felt very strongly that it was my responsibility to be able to stand up for and care for
mhm.
her. That was part of why I became an attorney, and then got so burnt out in law school that I became a corporate attorney.
Even better.
But but um, but in supporting her through that, through those 2 decades of navigating all of that harm and systems of harm, um, and then finally her getting to a place where she was quadriplegic. She couldn't move anything aside from like her
Mhm,
neck, essentially, and she wasn't able to get adequate care. And I have to name, we lived in Canada, so we have a lot of power and privilege when it comes to
mhm,
healthcare. I don't call America's healthcare system care. There's nothing caring
mhm,
about it. And had we lived in the United States, which we almost did, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have been
mm,
able to go to law school as my guess. I would have been probably working 5 jobs just to make ends meet, to have been able to support her, with the basic care that she needed, and probably still paying off the debt
mhm,
to this day. So I was very lucky to be able to be in the situation that we were, and we were still met with so much harm from all of these systems. And so ultimately, when she said, like, my quality of life is so abhorrent, this isn't worth living for, um, I fulsomely supported her in that, and her right to die with dignity, which
mhm,
is also part of systems of oppression, that we don't allow people the right to die with dignity. We think we know better.
mhm,
Um, and that was another fight. So instead of just like moving her into a hospice and spending time with each other and like doing end of life care, I, had to lawyer up and basically call in the dogs to get the facility that we were in to support us and supporting her and dying with dignity, and doing so in a way that was painless for
mhm,
her, because they had no interest in supporting us with that. And then when she ultimately did pass, that took 3 months. When she ultimately did pass, I was left with grief like, I've never experienced. I'm, again, a
mhm,
very deeply spiritual, connected, interpersonal person, do a lot of therapy, do a lot of healing work, and you can't prepare yourself for the loss of your only parent. Like, that's not
mhm,
possible, especially when you're fighting for so long. And in the wake of her death, I was left not only with the grief of her physical loss, but also all of the losses that we endured along the way, the ways in which I had to become a parent so young to support her and be a primary caretaker for her, all the ways that I had to like step up and fight and advocate for her. Just the absolute atrocities of traumas that I've witnessed, which I barely got into in the
Mm,
book. Um, and all of that kind of came crashing down because you're in fight or flight,
right.
just trying to get things done until, she actually passed. And so, like I said, I moved very quickly into grief work because it was totally overwhelming. And then very quickly into racial justice work, because to be enduring all of those things, all of that grief all at once for anyone is incredibly hard. When you add someone who's additionally oppressed by systems of oppression, it nearly killed me. It nearly took me out. So that really spurred me, like I said, reigniting into this work, and also carrying the torch for her and for all of my ancestors who were unable, who were not sufficiently safe to be able to speak their truth, to be able to speak out against these systems of harm, to be able to commit to their healing in the way that I am. So I really just continue their legacy, which is my deepest honor.
That's beautiful. Um, I wanted to, pivot to make it super clear that when you wrote this book, you wrote it for, two white women, right? Someone like me, right? A guide to white women,
Yeah.
right? Present, but for Black, Indigenous, and women of color, right? And so I
Yeah.
think that
Hmm.
making that distinction is important, to help tease up some practical questions I have around that. So can so we get it. Sometimes we need it explained simply. Can you
Yeah.
help make us make that connection where that difference lies?
Yeah, it's a really very nuanced
Mm-hmm.
discernment, but it was a really important one for me. So, most books are written to white people, irrespective of who's writing them. Toni Morrison talks about this. I name it explicitly in the book, the white
Mm-hmm.
gaze. And so I didn't really want to I didn't really want to perpetuate that, but it was very clear to me that in order for actual equity, for healing, for collective liberation, that I needed to write a book to white people. And I felt very strongly I needed to write a book specifically to white women plus, including cis and trans women, non-binary, gender non-conforming, agender, gender queer folks, but very specifically to cis white women,
Mm-hmm.
because as we said at the top of this, I think cis white women have the hardest time understanding the ways they're implicated in white supremacy and racism, and benefit from and perpetuate it on a daily basis. And I personally experienced the most harm personally and professionally from cis white women. So it's written to white women plus, but it is absolutely for Black, Indigenous, and women of color, meaning I made sure that there's no person who reads this book and doesn't feel affirmed, or isn't, that I'm not speaking directly to
Mm-hmm.
them, because I just refuse to write a book that someone that looks like me can't pick up and love
Mm-hmm.
and understand and see themselves in and get something from.
Mm-hmm.
It's also because we all have parts of us that we need to do better. I talk about this in the book, but we all have some level of power and privilege to some degree. Most of us are oppressed oppressors. There's some way,
Mm-hmm.
shape, or form that we can do better. Like, I'm light skinned, I'm a cis woman, I am thin, I live in Canada, I'm educated. There's lots of privileges that I have, and I cause harm to those who are oppressed by not belonging to these dominant groups that I belong to. And so I also need to do better. And there's, parts in the book that are very specifically for Black, Indigenous, and women of color, specific, and especially queer and trans Black and Indigenous women. So it's to white women because y'all have the most work to do, but it's for Black, Indigenous, and women of color because it's for our healing, it's for our liberation, it's for our well-being, which can never truly come to
Mm-hmm.
pass until people who have the most power and privilege are doing this work.
Mm-hmm. And, and that it's for your well-being part, I think leads me into my next question. Because there's a lot of performative stuff happening right now, right? And everything you're talking about in here is about its inner work, not outer work. And when I was hearing you talk about like, especially cis white women think they have, the least to do, or they're the least implicated, it's like, yeah, it's because we're so nice and we didn't,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
in reality, we are causing harm and we might not recognize it, and we might be causing harm to somebody who does not have the bandwidth or the energy or the care to let us know that we just were racially insensitive. We just, you know, caused a microaggression. We just created harm. What?
Or we're
Right.
racist.
Well,
Just
yeah,
call it what it is. We're racist.
that
Yeah.
we could repair, that we could apologize for, right? And that we could repair. How would you let's help listeners here, and also talk about how the book could be a tool to help them get the big picture. But how could they apologize and not screw that up?
Yeah. So, two things. One, the work starts within, but it's absolutely external work. The internal work is just the precipice, the starting point to getting out there and making external collective change. That's absolutely what's needed.
Mm-hmm.
But what is important is that we are doing that external collective work from a place of healing, from a place of understanding and acknowledgement of the ways in which we are also involved. Um, Otherwise, the work that we do out in the world can just be, and often is, just causing more harm.
Mm-hmm.
That's what a lot of the performative work is. It isn't actually for those who have been made most marginalized. It's for those who have the most power and privilege, so racially white people, to feel better about
Mm-hmm.
themselves, right? It's white centering, it's
Mm-hmm.
whitewashing. That's not for me. I don't benefit from that. I don't benefit from your Instagram post. I
Mm-hmm.
don't. Can you post something on Instagram and it be of support? Sure, but I really want to know, what are you doing in your day-to-day life that's actually uprooting the systems of harm that you partake in every single day, and doing that work to make change. And when you are doing that work, then it absolutely filters out into the world. Everything about your life will
Mm-hmm.
change. Everything about your life will change, which is also why some folks are so terrified to start the work. I think it changes for the better.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, hands down, without question. People like to really focus on what they'll lose, but you'll also gain so much: a deeper connection with yourself, a deeper connection with others. Black, Indigenous, and people of color are the global majority.
Mm-hmm.
So when white folks take on this work, you have access to being able to deeply connect with the majority of people who live on the planet, including yourselves and each other better.
Mm-hmm.
So that is incredibly important. In terms of apologizing, it's the same thing. It's like, are you apologizing for you so you feel better? Or are you apologizing because you know you've caused harm and you're trying to rectify harm for the person that you have inflicted violence or harm
Mm-hmm.
towards? And that requires you to first really do your inner work to have an understanding of, like, what is the harm that I've caused? Do I really understand the harm I've caused? If I haven't, what am I going to do so that I can understand it?
Mm-hmm.
Um, who am I apologizing for? And if the answer is not that other person, don't apologize. It's inauthentic
Mm-hmm.
and it's performative. Um, am I understanding that if I'm centering the other person in that apology, am I ensuring that I check in with that person first? The amount of apologies I've received from people that were very clearly white people, that were very clearly for them, it's like just like rushes out. There was no, hey, I would like to be able to make amends and try to apologize. Are you open and do you have capacity to receive this? Because your apology can just be more trauma, violence, and triggering for me,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you're making it about you. It can require more labor from me, and I'm not really interested. So checking in first, like, I would like to make amends with you. I would like to make an apology. Um, are you open to that? And being completely accepting if that person's like, no, or no, not right now, or whatever their answer is. Because if you're apologizing for them, then you will honor whatever that answer is. And then having a fulsome understanding that there's no apology without change behavior. If you apologize and do not change behavior, you're just being manipulative. There's no act. It was inauthentic and performative. So making sure that whatever the other side of your apology is, that you are doing your daily work to make sure that you are changing the behavior, which does not mean that you get it perfect. It does not mean that you do not cause harm moving forward, because that's impossible. And perfection and perfectionism are myths of white supremacy. They do not exist. That's not what we are striving for. But we do our best to know better, to do better, to mitigate harm moving forward. And we address and rectify harm that we cause.
Mm-hmm. That's a word. And here's what there's something else that I want to do as a reminder, is that when you talked about rushing into that apology, the urge to rush, as you noted, is self-centered for you. And in particular, it is for your comfort. So in not only in the
Yep.
rush to doing more harm, but it's for you and for your comfort,
Yes.
which is
Yes.
you're upholding the white supremacy and
Absolutely.
furthering the microaggression. And so, I think that, there's so much listeners can benefit from our conversation, so many different angles. And, I really hope they take the next step and buy your book and start to do the work and the inner work and the outer work. And if you had to pick one little thread that has come through, it's this idea of that you're seeking comfort. Why are you seeking comfort? Comfort is to keep things the same, to not change. That means you don't want to make the oppressed person's life better. And also, you're, as you said in the very beginning, you're keeping your own life from becoming more enlightened and better too. If you just have a couple more minutes for one more question, we are ending the trial for the second impeachment of the former president of the United States. I live in Washington, D.C. My husband works for network news in politics and is frequently at the Capitol. He was not there the day that insurgents took over and tried to cause a coup. And, this is, we're literally witnessing history right now. And there is a lot of pain around this particular event. But because there can be some relationship to this event, and there's a lot of bad crap happening right now with people denying what really happened and who's going to get prosecuted and what the next step is. But how can you connect for us the events of January 6th in DC to how much work needs to be done to dismantle white supremacy?
I think the events of January 6th are shocking to white people, most prominently. Like Black people are not shocked by anything. I mean, you used to hang us from trees not long ago. You used to pack up a picnic basket and bring your children to watch us be hung from trees and lashed and whipped.
Right.
Decades, not centuries, decades ago. There are photos of that in color. So a group of white supremacists storming the Capitol is not shocking to me. It is triggering and traumatizing to witness the ways in which cops and law enforcement allow that to take place when we know very well what would happen if those people were in Black bodies. Not only allow it to happen, open the gates and take selfies with these people, and for all those people to be able to walk away unscathed, not only like alive, but not even arrested. This is absolutely white supremacy in action. So it's frustrating because people like to focus on these events, and those events are really like shocking to white people. You feel uncomfortable. You can't turn away from your discomfort in those moments. And then you go back to your comfort and you forget. That's why these things keep happening. How many more George Floyds are going to need to happen for you guys to seriously get your shit together? And I swear very intentionally there.
It's an explicit show.
You got to do the work from okay. You have to do your work from the inside out so you understand the ways in which you are implicated in these systems, the ways in which you benefit from and perpetuate these systems all the time, whether there's white supremacists storming the Capitol or not. The ways in which all white people are racist, all white people perpetuate white supremacy intentionally and unintentionally, and you all have work to do. And intersectionally, we all have work to do to unplug from systems of white supremacy, homophobia, transphobia, classism, and end systems of harm so that we can actually come together and have collective healing and collective liberation.
And like we said before, we're going to be doing the work for just commit the rest of your life. Like, don't even ask the question anymore about, how do you know the work is done or whatever, commit to action.
You don't evolve. Yeah. If you're doing the work, you don't ask the question.
There you go.
Yep.
So I did, I don't know. I just ignored this comment as a troll, but maybe if there is, I don't know. My gut instinct says the most helpful response is all caps. They are not the same thing. But when I see people talking about the insurgency, they'll do that detouring, oh, but there were riots in the summer, and again, this is like not a real person, but just somebody I don't even know on Facebook saying something. Is there, besides saying that's a false equivalent, these are not the same thing, anything else that, is an action that you could say, to somebody that you're talking to or somebody on social media that, that might be talking about the riots in the United States?
I would tell them to read the book.
There we go.
Buy a copy of Do Better and learn how to do better.
Well, yes, and hopefully everybody listening today will be doing that. I will add that to my notes. I will say, "Buy Rachel Ricketts, Do Better," and you will learn a lot more. That will be my full commitment to you. Besides, helping to make sure that this is something I continue to engage in, and I have a white affinity group at my kids' school. And I did tell them when I booked you as a guest. And so they're excited to have the podcast. And we've been sharing some readings from the book as well. So I really appreciate your time and all your labor today, and definitely made me uncomfortable, and I'm here for it. You do a great job.
Thanks so much.
So once again, the book is
Thank
called
you.
Do Better, Spiritual Activism for Fighting and Healing from White Supremacy by Rachel Ricketts. Thank you, Rachel, so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me. Have a good day.
Okay, so I stopped the recording. Let me just double check. Okay, so the recording is done. We just need to stay on for a little bit. It's just pulling your side of the audio in case there's any issues, and it will get a really clear copy.
I do have to go in 2 minutes.
Yeah.
I have a hard end.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Thank you so much for talking to me. And let me see. Oh, it says, let me see.
I'm seeing do not close this tab. Oh, did it go away?
It says untitled recording done. It still says please don't close this tab.
It says your recording is uploaded. You can close this browser.
Oh, so I think.
But does it say that on your end? I'll make sure you have it.
I just see a done, so I think I'm good. I don't know if your publicist told you you're literally the first person I'm doing on Riverside, because I got so frustrated with Zoom where you can only live stream to one place at a time, and I got annoyed. So I was like, I'm going to do Riverside. So I don't want to make you late. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate your time, and I'm going to do my best, which,
Thank you so much.
All right, take care. Bye.
Bye.